Hi, everyone. Spirit Airlines, as y'all know, is gone, is dead. They were the largest carrier at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, and they were based in Fort Lauderdale, or the Fort Lauderdale area, Dania Beach, to be exact. They were one of the largest carriers at Orlando International Airport, and they did have an 8% market share at Miami International Airport, which made them one of the largest carriers at Miami International Airport. That having been said, American Airlines has about 65 to 70% of the traffic out of MIA. So being second or third at MIA is not as consequential as being second or third in MCO or FLL. So what happens next? And I should mention I know I have a lot of viewers and followers from Palm Beach County, due to my old political history in Palm Beach County, and also my current role as the managing editor of the Boca Raton Tribune. Spirit had one daily flight from Palm Beach International Airport. That one daily flight has already been backfilled by Breeze, David Nealman's carrier, that is adding a flight 4 times a week from West Palm Beach to Atlantic City. That was the only route Spirit flew from PBI. PBI, not a very competitive airport, not significant in this story. So let's talk about Fort Lauderdale and Orlando. Miami, we'll see what happens. I have some thoughts about what might happen in Miami as well, but we're not going to talk about that today. Let's talk first about Orlando, where Frontier is going to ramp up. Frontier being Spirit's kind of closest competitive carrier in terms of the same sort of business model, ultra low cost carrier. They're going to ramp up service on a number of routes that they and Spirit already competed on out of Orlando. And what I really like that Frontier is doing in Orlando is that they're developing, even though they are a ULCC with kind of some clunky times of flight timings, they are developing enough frequency and enough scale at MCO that they could have a ultra low cost carrier mega hub or super hub, if you want to call it that, where they've got flights coming in from Central America. They got flights coming in from the Caribbean. They've got flights coming in from the Northeast. They have flights coming in from the Midwest. They have some flights coming in from west of the Mississippi. They have flights coming in from, they have several flights coming in from west of the Mississippi. They've got flows now that can create connecting synergies. And while Frontier, outside of Denver, their home base, does not operate hubs, they operate just kind of large focus cities with a lot of point-to-point flights and random flight times as a result. I think they have the opportunity to backfill and create connecting opportunities, which, by the way, is what Southwest has been doing under their new business model, influenced by Elliott, the hedge fund that has really kind of revamped Southwest in a way that I'm not sure most customers think is so positive, but that remains to be seen how that whole thing plays out and how Southwest is perceived in the marketplace. At MCO, Southwest is the largest carrier. I think they will backfill some of what has been dropped by Spirit, and they will be able to maybe consolidate a bit, but Frontier could push them for market share. Still remains to be seen what Delta, the largest of the legacy carriers at MCO, does, or American or United. So that's Orlando. Let's talk about Fort Lauderdale, where JetBlue wasted no time. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, knowing that Spirit had shuttered operations, I had a press release from JetBlue saying that they were pouncing on 11 routes from Fort Lauderdale, starting 11 new routes. I want to say new routes because JetBlue has had these various stages where they've had a lot of point-to-point flights out of Fort Lauderdale. They've had to pull them down, and then they build them back up, and then they pull them back down, and now they're building them back up again to try and fill the void left by Spirit. Spirit, again, despite being a ULCC, had a much better operational record than JetBlue. JetBlue is a operational nightmare. It's one of the worst operations in the airline industry on the planet, right? Great product once you get on board. Maybe the best product in the United States besides Delta to actually fly but getting through their reservation maze, their operational mistakes, they're very delay prone, lots of cancellations, lots of IT problems. So they have never been able to actually optimize flight timings and flight schedules at any of their large bases. They have they had 6 large bases. I would say now Los Angeles, LAX is no longer one. So the other large bases have been Boston, the New York City area between JFK and Newark. Newark now being reduced in importance, or MCO, Orlando, FLL, Fort Lauderdale, and San Juan. Spirit, despite being a ULCC, did have that stuff down, did run a good operation, tended to have a good on-time record, and was able to take flows of passengers and connect them in Fort Lauderdale, which is not the best facility to connect passengers from, especially when you're transferring from international to domestic. But they were able to do it in a much more efficient way than JetBlue has ever been able to do it, which is why you've had all these meandering pull-ups and pull-downs in terms of flights and destinations from Fort Lauderdale for JetBlue going back over the course of the last 12 or 13 years. It's been like this. And at one time, Southwest was very tempted to jump into Fort Lauderdale themselves and start flying internationally from Fort Lauderdale. They abandoned that after a few years, but it was because of JetBlue's operational issues and lack of consistency. This time, though, however, JetBlue will have more gates, which will make the operation a little smoother. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but a little smoother. They're going to go, they've already, it seems like, whether they're squatting on the gates or they have some sort of agreement with Broward County, I don't know. But in terms of Terminal 4, which was where the bulk of Spirit's operation was at FLL, JetBlue seems to have moved in overnight and taken a lot of those gates and started running flights out of there. As I said, 11 new destinations, many of them are resumptions, but the resumptions include flying to places multiple times a day, which indicates they're going to try and bank flights. So Baltimore, which is a which was a Spirit destination. Spirit had a lot of volume between Fort Lauderdale and Baltimore. JetBlue had pulled out of Baltimore completely. They're going to go back in with 3 daily flights. Oftentimes when JetBlue flies to cities, they'll fly once a day to Fort Lauderdale, once a day to New York, once a day to New York JFK, and once a day to Boston. This time it looks like they're going in. So that lock, stock, and barrel in some of these places. 3 flights a day to Charlotte, another destination they once flew to and cut, and had the clunky thing of the 1 a day to Boston, the 1 a day to JFK, the 1 a day to Fort Lauderdale. Houston Intercontinental are going to go in with multiple daily flights. That is a destination they have never served from Fort Lauderdale. O'Hare and Detroit Metro to Fort Lauderdale was a bread and butter route for Spirit for 35 years. Excuse me, boy, I'm losing track of time. 35 years. So that was a flight that JetBlue flew and got slaughtered by Spirit and Delta on, Northwest and then Delta. They're going back on that with multiple daily flights. There will be some new international flights to Barranquilla and Cali in Colombia, which were those are subject to government approval, which were longtime Spirit destinations. From Fort Lauderdale, some other places I would look at them trying to fly to in the future are Lima, which was a Spirit destination that JetBlue tried to compete with Spirit on Fort Lauderdale, Lima for many years, pulled off of that route. Fort Lauderdale, Quito now is without a nonstop service with Spirit going out of business, and TAME, the Ecuadorian flag carrier that flew that route for many years, going out of business during COVID, and JetBlue having pulled that route. And then there is also the need to maybe for JetBlue to get back on the Fort Lauderdale Bogota route that they had dropped 2 or 3 years ago. That now is in a monopoly for Avianca, who can raise fares as they might see fit on that route. Or if you want to get a cheaper fare, you might have to drive to Miami if you're in the Fort Lauderdale area, because Avianca now controls that route unless JetBlue jumps back on it. Armenia and Bucaramanga are 2 Colombian cities that had longtime Spirit service to Fort Lauderdale. Do not have nonstop service to Miami, if I'm not mistaken, either of those places. That maybe JetBlue needs to look at flying to from Fort Lauderdale, and then some of the Central American destinations that now lose nonstop service to Fort Lauderdale from because of the loss of Spirit. So in terms of that, I would say now that they can establish some connecting flows, some operational stability, more gate space, maybe a little more breathing room in Fort Lauderdale, maybe a little bit more of a price premium, they are in a position where they can perhaps get aggressive in Central America, South America, and the Caribbean and connect passengers through Fort Lauderdale. Now, as I said on my video the other day, a JetBlue Spirit merger, I believe, would have resulted in both airlines collapsing, the merged airline collapsing. And so I am not like the Republican blue checkmark political operatives who don't know anything about the airline industry, don't know anything, quite frankly, don't know anything about business here in Florida, that are saying, oh, it's the fault of Joe Biden, it's the fault of Pete Buttigieg. By the way, the DOT doesn't approve. The DOT didn't get in the way of the merger. It was the DOJ that sued. And it was a judge that ruled in DOJ's favor. The fault of Elizabeth Warren, because we know U.S. senators, they're able to block airline mergers, right? All that nonsense. That all having been said, JetBlue as a standalone carrier is hardly viable. They are probably the next airline to. If Spirit hadn't gone under, JetBlue would have gone under. And I think JetBlue is carrying a heavy debt burden. It would have been even heavier if they had absorbed Spirit. And they needed a break. This might be the break if they can go into Fort Lauderdale and scale and get up to maybe somewhere between 180 daily flights and 200 daily flights. Maybe they can make it. They really need Fort Lauderdale to work. They really need Fort Lauderdale to work. They are in a fight to the death with Delta in both Boston and the New York City area. Delta has better resources, quite frankly, a better product, a better operation, a global network. In Orlando, they have fallen well behind Frontier, Southwest, and even Delta itself. I think they've even fallen now behind American. So they've lost turf there, and it sounds like what they're going to do is try and shift resources from Orlando, including people resources, including employees, from MCO down to FLL to kind of spur this Fort Lauderdale expansion. Now, part of the reason Fort Lauderdale, I know a lot of Dade County people will say, well, Fort Lauderdale is a garbage airport, and look at the yields, look at the price point, look at the price premium you get out of MIA rather than FLL. There's more business travel out of Miami, all of that. I tend to agree with that to an extent, but here's where I'm going to push back on that fairly aggressively. Now that Spirit is gone, I think part of the reason Fort Lauderdale's yields were so low is because Spirit was the #1 carrier in Fort Lauderdale, and they were an ultra low cost carrier. You see a similar dynamic in places where other places where Spirit were strong and where Frontier is strong. And you see now it took a while for United to recover in Denver from Spirit and Southwest really kind of trashing yields in and out of Denver, which is a major aviation hub, a major global aviation hub, not just a major regional aviation hub. So there is that. And I think now that Spirit's out of the way, JetBlue will be able to create a price premium, a fair premium, assuming Frontier or Allegiant or someone like that doesn't really come after them in Fort Lauderdale. I think it's possible one of those two airlines, I would say those would be the two that might. Allegiant is trying to ingest Sun Country now in a merger. I don't know that they have the resources to really get aggressive in Lauderdale, although it's possible with some of Sun Country's resources, they could reallocate them from MSP, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And the two markets we see where Fort Lauderdale has the price premium over Miami are Los Angeles and San Francisco. And that's because JetBlue has had a superior hard product with their Mint business class configuration on their A320s between Fort Lauderdale and LAX and Fort Lauderdale and SFO now for almost a decade. And as a result, they have created a price premium to where business travelers who are going to the West Coast of the United States, whether they're in Dade County or whether they're in Broward or Palm Beach, tend to gravitate towards the better product despite the higher fare that JetBlue offers from Fort Lauderdale to LAX and San Francisco versus what American offers to LAX and San Francisco from Miami, or United offers to San Francisco from both Miami and Fort Lauderdale. So that's something to, and they drove Alaska Airlines off the Fort Lauderdale LAX route, by the way. JetBlue did. So that's something worth noting, and I think it might be a template for where JetBlue is able to go with pricing and with their build out in Fort Lauderdale.